Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree, and today we're talking about the somewhat defunct, but not necessarily defunct, USA Network. What I mean by that is it's no longer what it was. But what was it? Recently, as in a few months ago, I did a video talking about the original superstations, WGN, WTBS, and TNT. Those were all some of the early channels you could get if you had cable TV. But also early on, there was another network that was launched called USA Network. USA Network is different. I don't know if it was the first cable TV network that wasn't a paid premium channel like HBO, but it definitely was not a superstation. There was no local affiliate somewhere in Chicago or Detroit or Seattle or wherever that was broadcasting locally and then transmitting that signal up to a satellite like what WTBS was doing and WGN was doing. That's why they get the name Superstation. But USA Network was different. Now, USA Network was also in the early days different in another way, because it wasn't a network technically, even though it was called USA Network. It didn't have any locally produced content, so it wasn't regulated by the FCC initially, or at least not by the radio airwaves, portion of the FCC. They would get their hands into cable TV later. But initially, USA was like all syndicated programming. They had no original programming. It was just anything they could pick up. It was all syndicated stuff. And a lot of it was reruns. Now, they had semi-original programs like USA Up All Night and Cartoon Express. And I say semi-original because Cartoon Express was an animated block of cartoons that ran on Sunday mornings, I believe. Saturdays and Sundays, if I'm not mistaken. And it had these intros and these interstitials and these bumpers in between the commercial breaks and the introductions of the new commercials that were like these brand new little commercial segments featuring the various characters from the different shows in the USA Cartoon Express lineup. But that wasn't an original show, necessarily. Same with USA Up All Night. You had your hosts. The most famous, there were multiple hosts, but the most famous host from USA Up All Night was Gilbert Gottfried. Basically, he would host some sort of midnight party at like some kind of college dorm or some type of situation like that. And they would just watch B-movies. That's why it was called USA Up All Night. And that's all it was. Initially, the network had programs like that. And they also picked up some wrestling early on. They got the main event, which would eventually, the WWF main event, which would eventually rebrand into WWF Monday Night Raw, which would be a ratings powerhouse for the USA Network from the 90s all the way up until today, which they're now going to lose because that program is moving to Netflix next year. And then starting in the early 90s, they began investing in original programs. They had a few offbeat sitcoms you may or may not remember. Most notably was Wings, which I think was their biggest ratings draw on the network. But they kind of floundered throughout the 90s with original programming. And in the mid-2000s, 2004, 5, 6, in that area, they really hit their stride. with their characters programming block. They had a it was a crime action adventure type show. Something Blue, I think it was. I don't remember. It was a popular show. I didn't watch it, but it was a popular show. And then they had Monk, which was a crime dramedy. And then they had Psych, which was the highlight of the network, like the best show they ever produced. But sometime in the 90s, the company USA Network, sometime in the 90s, USA Network and the Sci-Fi Channel came under the same ownership. Eventually, they were bought out or they may have been started by NBC Universal. I'm not 100%. I don't really know the history, which is, you watch my videos, it's not really about history. There's other YouTubers for that. This is just more about reminiscing. You know, what I remember and what I presume you probably remember. Or, you know, and hopefully you leave a comment what shows you do remember. What shows did you watch? I wish I could remember that crime show. Anyways, it'll come to me. But then the Sci-Fi Channel also piggybacked off of that, and they started doing sci-fi originals that were getting popular at the same time, with Warehouse 13 and Eureka. And I think they had a Stargate and then a rebranded, revived, rebooted Battlestar Galactica, which they were able to get from the because they had access to the NBC catalog. The Sci-Fi Channel, like USA Network, mostly started out just with syndicated and rerun programming. A lot of Star Trek, a lot of Land of the Lost, stuff like that. But both networks really came into their own in the early 2000s, and that's when they really started to get original programming that took off. Burn Notice, that's the show. It was called Burn Notice. I told you it would come back to me. They had other shows, but those were their three big ones. Monk and Psych were more or less the same type of show. Monk was a quirky, I guess, detective type, but he had like OCD and was really quirky and goofy. Played by Tony Shalhoub, who actually started on Wings, which was another USA Network show. And Psych was he was sort of a fake psychic detective that worked for the Santa Barbara Police Department. He was an independent private investigator, but he basically claimed he was a psychic. He was hyper alert and hyper, I don't know what the word is, observant, I think it was, and he had like photographic memory or something like that. I don't think it was eidetic memory. I don't think they ever said, but he had a really good memory. And he basically used those skills to trick people into thinking he was a psychic. And he helped with his partner, Burton Guster. They would solve crimes. But they were, man-children. They were babies in grown-up clothes who got into hijinks and shenanigans, which was the crux of the show. Most of the comedy came from that. You had the straight-laced detective, Carlton Lassiter, and then you had his partner who had kind of an affinity for Psych. Well, his name isn't Psych. Sean Spencer was his name, but anyway, character in the show. And so they had sort of a flirty relationship until they kind of sort of started dating later in the show. Spoilers, I guess. Eek. He had other girlfriends come and go on the show. So did Gus, occasionally. And a lot of their hijinks were relevant to pop culture references. This was the beginning of that meta period, where everything had to reference everything else. Where they had to wear like superhero t-shirts and reference the A-Team and stuff like that. It was a pretty entertaining show. I never watched more than a few clips of Monk. Never actually sat down to watch a full show. And I could care less about Burn Notice or any of the other shows that ran on USA. I was all about Psych. That was it. That was the show I was there for. And earlier in its existence, USA Up All Night, which I discovered a lot of B movies and horror movies by watching that program. And then the network just kind of became sort of bland. They kept doing original shows, but they didn't have the staying power that those three shows had. They just sort of would get a season or half a season or a season and a half and then just sort of fade into obscurity. And ever since the rise of streaming, USA's biggest program right now, they actually share with the Sci-Fi Channel, and that's Chucky. Their other big program is, and has always been, WWF, or WWE now, Monday Night Raw. But they're losing that next year to Netflix. So it's to be seen if Chucky is going to be able to carry the network. Chucky might not have legs. What's going to happen to USA? Probably just going to be a place where they dump shows that get, made for streaming, and then they just sort of pop up on USA from time to time. I don't know. I don't have cable anymore. And I have no freaking interest in cable because I'm not paying $175 a month for 12 channels and a whole bunch of fucking pay-per-view. Fuck that. Cable is obnoxious these days. You don't get shit anymore. Not shit worth watching. Not when you gotta sit through fucking commercials. And we've gotten beyond that. Although Netflix and some of the streaming services are trying to shove ads down our throats again. But anyways, I don't know. I guess I have fond memories, somewhat, of the USA Network. Not as fond memories of TBS, because TBS had, Saved by the Bell, which, was a much more, I would say, culturally prolific show than even the most popular shows USA had. I think, other than Monday Night Raw, I think, just Saved by the Bell permeates pop culture. Psych just sort of dinged a little bit. It was popular for a bit, but then it faded away. And I never hear anybody talk about Psych anymore. I've never encountered another person who ever talked about Monk or Burn Notice or the one where they rode bikes on the beach. What was that show called? I don't even fucking remember. The one with Mark Paul Gosselaar. Nobody remembers that show. Got canceled quickly, and then they tried to rebrand him, I guess, as a detective or a lawyer or something on another show. I don't know. Whatever. USA had a bunch of flops, is what I'm getting at. A lot of shows nobody remembers. The one sitcom people remember from the 90s is Wings. Everything else is just kind of sort of out in the ether. There's, some people who remember it, but, none of it had lasting impact on pop culture. Like I said, the most impactful show they had was Psych and maybe Monk, and neither of them really made a big impression on pop culture. Not really. Not as a whole. I've never seen other shows reference either of them. I don't know about Family Guy. Family Guy kind of parodies everything. But, Family Guy's become its own beast. I'll have to do a video on that one of these days. Not looking forward to it. Anyways, I don't really have anything else to say about USA Network other than it was a thing for a little bit. It was a real popular thing for a smaller bit. And then it just sort of went away, I guess. I don't know. Whatever. Stay cool.